From the mind of Mark Yoshimoto Nemkov.
So Jeff Stewart, author, inspired me to talk today about audiobook chains. And I know a lot of you do audiobooks out there, and my hat is off to you because that is long and arduous work, man. I have been there myself. And I actually have not done an audiobook in many years because the last experience I had doing so was so bad, and it was primarily because the sound was just not right for me. It was a 225,000 word nonfiction historical book about the lead up to the revolution for Oxford University Press by a best-selling author. And while I'm grateful for the experience, the problem is I didn't get to record it in my own facility. I had to go to some studio in Hollywood and they stuck an SM81 in my face. And the sound that I got in my headphones was just so boring and dull, and I just couldn't get into it because I couldn't really feel myself. I couldn't tell if I was delivering the narrative, right? And there's not a lot you can do, but there's emphasis you can do in nonfiction. And I just felt like I wasn't getting my sound. It sucked. And it ended up being 23.75 hours long of finished audio that took probably about 36 hours to record, because it was just a slog. And I realized that when I did the post-mortem after that, I realized that the sound was the thing that really got me down. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about proper audiobook sound, even though I don't do audiobooks anymore, even though I really prefer the wham bam thank you ma'am of a 30-second commercial to many hours of narration doing an audiobook. But that being said, let's talk about audiobook chains. And not only the what, but the why. All right, so you're listening to the Neve 88RS going into the Precision de-esser, and then everything here is kicked over to aux 1, where we have the Holy Trinity, the CVOX, the Oxford Dynamic EQ, and the Neve DFC. So I like this sound because it's very clean. The Neve 88RS, a board you would use to record an orchestra, so it's really nice for a nice clean voice recording. Now I'm going to take everything out of the chain so you hear what this sounds like with nothing on it. All right, so let's just pop everything out. All right, so this is the 416 right into the Apollo, and it couldn't be any more boring, right? Can you imagine listening to this for hours on end? No. So the Neve, let's put the Neve in. Now I could use a little bit of gating expanding here to cut some of that noise, but we're going to deal with that later. So here, if I just take out everything, so it's just right through the Neve, it's a little bit better. I want to add a little bit of EQ here, right? My usual 9K and 4.5K, because I like that on my voice. And just a little touch of that. And then right here what I'm doing is I'm ducking a little bit at 150, right? Just a couple dB out at 150, because I like the boom in the room here, right? So you feel it's a little bit too woofy here, and then we take it out here. But we're still not done yet. All right, so a little bit of compression, just a tiny bit on the top, because I always feel like when you apply just a little bit on the top, it helps you overall. So this is better, but still not great. Of course, de-esser, no problem. And here we go. Now we're going to get into really the crux of what makes this sound. C-Suite CVOX is brilliant because it does help you make up for some of the sins of your acoustic treatment, right? It gets you part of the way from where you are to where you need to be. And even though I'm in a well-treated booth, right, and I can handle this noise any way with an expander or with really a different method than CVOX. I like CVOX because CVOX takes the noise out from behind the signal. And when I'm doing an audiobook or when I'm really doing any kind of narration like this, especially an audiobook, because it's not just about the moments where there is talking. It's about the moments of silence too, because silence is powerful. Extreme silence is very powerful because it gives the listener the moment to reflect on what is happening, to really process what's going on. Silences are very important, and the deeper the silence, the deeper the listener can go into their own mind. Think about that for a moment. So I have this crushed at 78. I don't need to have 78 here. but I have it crushed, right? So we have this dead silence, which I like. So, and also make sure ambience on 0. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So now this is where we start to really shape the sound. Now with Oxford Dynamic EQ, I'm just using this plugin called this preset called Clarity. So without it, right, it sounds okay. But when I put this in, you hear that? Hear that lift in there? Now what that lift is intimacy. And intimacy allows me a greater range of emotion. Now, here, let me take it out again, right? So without it, almost sounds like I just put cotton over the front of the microphone. But with it, here I am. Now, think about this for a moment. When you are doing voiceover, right, there are 3 entities that you could be. You can be the voice of authority. You could be the voice of reason. Or you could be like the best friend. And so within the context of those 3 personalities, right, the voice of authority, you have to listen to what I'm saying, right? Listen to what I'm saying. Now, when I apply the Oxford Dynamic EQ in here, the clarity in there, it goes from being right here, it goes from being more dull to being more immediate, right? So I'm right here, and I'm telling you, this is the way it should be. So it feels a little bit more like a command. Now, when I'm the voice of reason, right, I'm compelling you to do something, to think about something, right? To do the right thing. You have to do the right thing. So I have to be gentle, but my words have to feel intimate and immediate. Now, without the Oxford Dynamic EQ, and I'm telling you these things, again, it sounds like maybe you have like an earplug in, or I have cotton in my mouth or something. But here it sounds a little bit more intimate, right? So for storytelling, think about this, right? Inner monologue or soft dialogue between people. And that also goes to the my best friend thing. Because when you're talking to your best friend, right? Unless you're like out on the basketball court or playing squash together or some reason why you're shouting at each other. You're not talking to each other at this volume unless you're working in a machine shop. When you're talking to your friend, hey man, are you okay? Are you doing okay today? Because, I'm a little bit worried, and I just want to make sure you're okay. So it allows me to get down here, where otherwise I'm doing this, and it feels a little bit more cloudy. So I only use Oxford Dynamic EQ for this one trick, but it's a great trick. And that's why I love it. And then finally, Neve DFC, right? Without it, this isn't bad at all. You could get away with this. We don't need it for the expander gate. We've already got that taken care of with CVox. What does DFC do? DFC adds the glue to it, right? So now it feels more polished. It feels more professional. It feels done, right? We've pretty much taken, hear my throat gurgle. We've taken out the need to like remaster it at the end. This is a really nice sound. Now, I feel like there's still a lot of low end going on, but there's a point to that. So here, I'm just using a simple filter. I use my 15K lift just to add air. I do that on everything. And that could just be a function of what I like in my sound from my own space. But this filter, this low end here at 53, right? Without it, it feels okay. But when I pop it back in, even though I'm doing the high pass here at around 80, I still add this after everything else to clean it up. And it feels really polished and nice here. Now, again, I feel like this low end here that you're hearing is a bit too much, but I like it. I like it in my headphones. I like the rumble I get. And while it may be too much for the listener, the end listener, through their consumer level devices. Now remember, most people are listening to stuff through earbuds, through car speakers, through consumer level playback equipment. An iPhone speaker, an Alexa speaker, right? God forbid, right? The sound of your voice coming through an Alexa speaker, a little mono Alexa speaker. But that's what people listen to stuff with. And remember, people are multitasking when they're listening to audiobooks some of the time. They're driving, they're on the bus commuting, they're doing the laundry. So your sound is very important. Your sound is everything. You are not just every character in the book. You're not just all the dialogue. You are the narrator. You are the orchestra. You are the background. Your voice makes up the entirety of the mind movie that is playing back in the listener's head. You're painting that picture with your sound. So your sound has to be enveloping. It has to be welcoming. It has to be really something that's going to keep people's attention without making their ears tired listening to you. You want to corral somebody in, and you want them to be listening and then look down at their watch and be like, oh my God, I'm 4 hours late for work, right? You basically want to get people fired from their jobs because they can't stop listening to your work. I know that's kind of arch, but that's what you want is you want people to not be able to put you down. And that is the key, the sound, right? Your delivery, that's one thing. But the sound that you give to the end user is going to be a big part of what keeps them hanging on to every word. Now, again, this is a little bit too bottom-endy, but I like it like this. I would record a book like this, and then I would go back and I would shape the bottom end. Right? I would go back and do I would do a high pass on it once I really figured out where I wanted to tighten up the bottom end too. So I'm really overshooting what I would normally do in order to just be able to shape it later perfectly. So overall, this is a sound that I would use to record an audiobook, and I would high pass it for the final product. Now, if you're feeling a little bit more confident about the bottom end. And the bottom end really, I feel like, especially if you're a male narrator, is very important because you can get a lot of authority out of it. And authority helps drive the story because you have to tell people stuff and they have to believe it. So the voice of authority, right? The voice of reason, you're compelling someone to try to believe your point of view. And the best friend is like you're sharing something with somebody. But the voice of authority tells you what you're supposed to believe. And I feel like a lower end, like a more authoritative low end, when you can achieve that, when it's necessary, helps you propel the narrative in that way. Now, if you're feeling more confident about your sound, this is one approach I would use because the Neve 88RS is just so clean and smooth and beautiful. But there is another control strip, another preamp that I would use. All right, the Vox box. Now let's get this dialed in. All right, so right about there. Let's see, we want a little bit of compression. Hello. All right, just a touch there. I like the de-esser on the Vox box, but I like it as a secondary de-esser. I like this because, like the 416 is great on copy because it stays out of your way, but it also still has a little bit of that high-endy thing to it. So sometimes I feel a little sibilant around 12, so this is good. Really, for me, it's around 12, 13, but this works. No EQ. Everything else pretty good. So what you're hearing right now, right? This feels a little bit more scooped with a controlled bottom end. And this is definitely a tone that I could use, I think, for doing audiobooks. If I had a tighter deadline and I really knew that I wanted to just keep the low end right around here, this is what I would use. I like the Vox box. Now, when you're doing an audiobook, right? And you can hear it, there's still a little bit of that tube color. Now, when you're doing an audiobook, when you're doing a narration, now think about this for a moment. You have 3 spots in your entire chain, right? In your entire rig, where you can inject character or color in the sound. Your microphone, your preamp, and your processing. I feel like your processing should always be clean as possible. And then I feel like really it leaves like the preamp and the microphone. A 416 is still a very colorful microphone, as it is. When you're speaking up close to it, you get a little bit more secondary harmonic distortion in it. So it's already colored. The sound is already colored. You don't necessarily need a colored preamp. And the more heavy tube sound you put into it, I think the more, I don't know, I think you start to drift away from a sound that is compelling for a long-term listening session. So right here, this is definitely, you definitely have that tube coloration. But if you want something cleaner, you can do that with the Vox box too. Let's do this. And then we just crank up the output and listen to how much cleaner and crisper that is, right? That feels really nice. I like that. We can Here, hold on. You can even do this a little bit more. A little bit more. Yeah, I like that. That's a little too clean. So we'll do that. Yeah. So I like that sound. That works too. So you can get a nice clean sound out of the Vox box. And it does feel a little bit scooped in the vocal region. And that's because the Vox box was purpose-built for vocals. And it really carves the vocal into a shape that allows it to live nicely, play nicely with other elements in the mix. But it also just sounds nice on its own. So here's another approach you could take, or this is another approach I would take. So when I do this, I'm going to read a little bit of copy for anybody who's still hanging around listening to this. I'm going to read a little bit of copy into the Vox box, and I'll pop it back to the Neve 88RS, and then we can compare the two. So this is just a cold read. I just pulled this up. This is from my Parsec award-winning novel, #1 with a Bullet. Frost. The thin layer forming on the road crunches beneath the wheels of Rodrigo as he pedals his bike, the huff of his breath trailing in the frigid morning air. Muscular legs pumping furiously, sinews burning like fire. He leans hard to the left as he veers onto another street in the village without losing a single beat. Each lungful of air feels like icy needles stabbing from the inside, but it doesn't slow him down one bit. His body is a well-conditioned machine, built up to endure any type of physicality needed to get the job done. All right, so let's get rid of that. Exterior, French Alps village, morning. Frost. The thin layer forming on the road crunches beneath the wheels of Rodrigo as he pedals his bike, the huff of his breath trailing in the frigid morning air. Muscular legs pumping furiously, sinews burning like fire. He leans hard to the left as he veers onto another street in the village without losing a single beat. Each lungful of air feels like icy needles stabbing from the inside, but it doesn't slow him down one bit. His body is a well-conditioned machine, built up to endure any type of physicality needed to get the job done. All right, I want to know what you're thinking. All right, all you audiobook guys out there, what are you thinking? Leave a comment. Until next time, this is Mark Yoshimoto Nemkov, fading to black.